Dear you, listen closely to the sound of your days, the alarm, the notifications, the background noise of movement, conversation, expectation. For a long time, those sounds carried you forward. They gave structure to your life. They told you where to be, what to respond to, what needed attention next. And you followed them, not because you were forced to, but because that's what you knew how to do. You learned to move when something called for you. You learned to keep pace. You learned how to continue. What you didn't notice at first was the absence of another sound. The quiet internal spark that used to guide you. Not excitement, exactly. Not motivation in a dramatic sense. Just a subtle sense of want. A feeling that you were moving towards something that mattered to you personally. Not just something that needed to be done. At some point, that spark softened. It didn't disappear overnight. It didn't make a scene. It simply grew quieter as you grew more responsible, more capable, more dependable. You still cared. You still tried. You still showed up, but the emotional energy behind your actions felt thinner, stretched across too many obligations. You noticed it when you completed tasks without satisfaction, when achievements felt neutral instead of rewarding, when progress felt mechanical instead of meaningful. You kept going anyway, because stopping didn't feel like an option. Because you didn't want to disappoint anyone. Because you didn't know what you would do if you slowed down long enough to feel the absence fully. So you told yourself this was normal. You told yourself sparks come and go. You told yourself discipline mattered more than feeling. And maybe it did, for a while. But somewhere beneath that logic, there was a quiet grief. Not loud enough to disrupt your life, just present enough to make things feel slightly off. Like you were doing all the right things, but not always for the right reasons. Like your life was technically working, but you weren't fully inside it. You didn't talk about this much. It felt indulgent to say you missed a feeling you couldn't define. It felt childish to want something more than stability. So you stayed practical. You focused on what made sense. You prioritized continuity over curiosity. If you're reading this and feeling a subtle pull in your chest, it's because this experience is widely shared. Many people keep going long after the spark fades, not because they don't care, but because they care too much about being reliable. Too much about doing what's expected. Too much about not rocking the boat. You weren't wrong for continuing. You were strong for enduring. But endurance has a limit when it's not balanced with meaning. On the outside, your life looked steady. On the inside, something felt unresolved. This contrast was hard to explain even to yourself. You had structure, you had routines. You had reasons to believe things were okay. And because of that, you questioned your own discomfort. You wondered if you were being ungrateful. You wondered if you were expecting too much from life. You wondered if adulthood simply felt like this. Your past self understands now that the issue wasn't lack of gratitude. It was lack of emotional alignment. You were investing energy into things that no longer replenished you. You were fulfilling roles that made sense but didn't resonate the way they once did. And because you had built a life around being capable, it was difficult to admit that capability alone wasn't enough anymore. You didn't stop caring. You stopped feeling connected to why you cared. This happens when growth outpaces intention, when life keeps moving, but inner values shift quietly in the background. The things that once motivated you don't disappear, they just stop fitting. And when that happens, continuing on autopilot becomes exhausting. Your past self sees now that the fading spark wasn't a flaw. It was information. It was telling you that something inside you had changed, even if your circumstances hadn't. And change, when unacknowledged, often shows up as dullness rather than pain. You might have noticed your reactions slowing, your enthusiasm flattening, your curiosity narrowing. Not because you were depressed or broken, but because you were emotionally understimulated by your own life. You were performing continuity instead of engaging with purpose, and because no crisis forced you to stop, you didn't. You adjusted instead. You lowered expectations. You told yourself sparks are overrated. You convinced yourself consistency was the goal. But consistency without connection eventually feels empty. Your past self understands now that sparks don't disappear forever. They go quiet when they're ignored. They fade when there's no room for them. When every decision is made for practicality alone, when curiosity is postponed indefinitely, you weren't lazy for feeling this way. You weren't entitled. You were responding to a misalignment between effort and meaning. You see it that way. The self-criticism softens. You stop asking what's wrong with you and start asking what no longer fits. And that question, while uncomfortable, is deeply honest. Let me say this to you clearly, without urgency and without pressure. You are allowed to pause and ask what you want again, not what makes sense, not what looks good, not what keeps everything running smoothly, but what feels quietly right to you now. The spark you miss isn't something you lost. It's something you outgrew in its old form. And that's okay. Sparks change as we do. What once excited you may no longer be enough. That doesn't mean you're ungrateful or inconsistent. It means you're evolving. You don't have to abandon your life to reconnect with meaning. You don't have to make dramatic changes or risky leaps. Reconnection often begins subtly with attention, with permission, with curiosity. You can start by noticing what drains you more than it should. Noticing what feels obligatory rather than engaging. Noticing where you're going through motions instead of experiences. These notices aren't accusations, they're guides. You are allowed to want fulfillment without guilt. You are allowed to question paths you once chose with confidence. You are allowed to seek meaning beyond survival and stability. This doesn't make you irresponsible. It makes you honest. Some days the spark will flicker back unexpectedly in a conversation, a quiet moment, a new interest. Other days, it may still feel distant. That's part of the process. You're not meant to feel inspired all the time. You're meant to feel connected often enough to know you're living, not just continuing. If you're listening to this and feeling understood, it's because many people reach this point quietly. They don't burn out, they dim. They don't collapse, they coast. And there is relief in realizing that dimming is reversible. You don't need to force passion. You don't need to chase motivation. You just need to stop ignoring the absence. Presence invites meaning. Attention invites engagement. And when you allow yourself to slow down emotionally, you create space for something new to emerge. You kept going when you needed to. You survived when it mattered. Now, you're allowed to ask for more than continuation. Take a breath. Let it ground you. You don't have to decide everything today. You don't have to reignite the spark immediately. You just have to acknowledge that it matters to you. And that acknowledgement is the beginning. Sincerely, you